So good afternoon, everyone, and you're welcome to today's class. Um, it will be a continuation of the initial class we have that boils down or focuses attention on the Keynesian and the classical aggregate supply and aggregate demand relation. So we want to understand the classical opinion relating to aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And then we also want to understand the Keynesian opinion with respect to the aggregate demand and the aggregate supply. So our understanding of that helps us to actually have a broad view of what macroeconomics is all about. And I said from the beginning of the class that you have had about 4 to 5 topics, lectures, and those lectures is just a guide to this particular topic, because this topic is a combination of those other previous lectures you've had. So we've been able to establish the aggregate demand relation. We've been able to establish the relationship between your commodity market as well as your money market, all right? And we have been able to establish that relationship that links your output with respect to your prices. We've been able to derive the IS equation. We've been able to derive the LM equation. We've been able to put the ISLM together and derive our aggregate demand relation. We've been able to graphically show the relationship between your ISLM and your aggregate demand. So we have been able to construct this. And so last week we started with the idea, all right, of our aggregate supply. And I said in that introduction that the way the classicalists have their opinion or form their opinion about aggregate supply is different from the view of the Keynesian on the concept of the aggregate supply. And I made you to understand that if we follow the classicalist assumption, all right, under their output determination, they formed their opinion using the production function. So they believe that the aggregate supply relation emanates from the production function. And so when you have your output as a function of capital and labor, the assumption there is that capital is fixed, okay? And so capital does not change. And since capital does not change, capital is given. All we now need to change is your labor. So that means there must be a relationship between your labor as well as your output. The labor here talks about the labor employed, which is the employment rate. And so that establishes a relationship between your employment rate and your output. And the classicalists have the opinion that the aggregate supply curve is vertical and is not horizontal. And that assumption surrounds it that the classicalists are saying that the aggregate supply, the output, is not dependent on price. And that was about the price neutrality, meaning price does not affect changes in what? Output, okay? And that is the classicalists. That's where we stopped, okay? And then we looked at the Keynesian, all right? The Keynesian are of the opinion that no, output is dependent on prices, that prices changes with the level of what? Output, okay? And so they have their own perspective on the way the aggregate supply curve is. So I presented a graph and I was trying to explain that graph last week, which is where we stopped. However, many of you failed to understand, or many of you could not understand that graph. So I felt that I jumped some stages before getting to that graph. And that is why today I just want to quickly clear out that particular area for you to understand. So I now presented the preliminary case, okay, of our analysis. You will see this particular curve, all right? You see our aggregate demand curve. Our aggregate demand curve has been established. We know our aggregate demand curve. We've known how it looks like. But you see the aggregate supply curve, all right? This particular aggregate supply curve is what? Is vertical. And that means it does not change with the level of what? Of output, okay? So this means that any change in demand, when aggregate demand changes, okay? If this aggregate demand changes, either it increases to this particular point, it will only cause an increase in the general price level from either P star to somewhere here, while output does not change, all right? So this is consistent with the quantity theory of money. Remember, quantity theory of money, MV equals to Q, when velocity, all right, and real output are constant, they don't change. Increases in money will cause an increase in prices. That quantity theory of money is explained in this aggregate demand, aggregate supply relation, meaning increases in money supply, which is a policy variable from the demand side, which is a demand shock, will cause an increase in your aggregate demand while output remains unchanged. So when I tell you to use the ADAS relation to explain the relevance of the quantity theory of money, you should be able to tell me that from that quantity theory of money that says that increases in money supply will necessarily or will lead to increases in inflation prices without output changing. This graph explains that particular word relation, all right? Now, the classicalists use this to describe the long run and short run scenario by saying that, oh, our aggregate supply curve is vertical and is dependent on our real output. So to the classicalists, I highlighted here, output is determined by one, the supply side. Demand does not determine output. That's the classical, that's the Say's law. That's why they come up with that law, the Say's law, that says output is dependent, Say's law that supply creates its own demand. That when you supply goods, that is when demand will be created. If you do not supply goods, demand will not be created. So the classicalists believe that output is determined by the supply side, meaning if you want output to change, you have to change this particular aggregate supply relation. That is different from the Keynesian. The Keynesian believes that if you want to change output, you can change this aggregate demand. But the classicalists are saying no. If you are to change output, you can only change output by adjusting this aggregate supply. That means output is determined by the what? Supply side. And the supply side explains your production function that you did in your micro. Y as a function of AKL, capital, labor, and technology. That's the classicalists. They believe those are the three major determinants of what? Output. Okay. The next thing they also said is that changes in demand for goods and services only affects prices and it does not affect output. I've explained this before. In essence, they are saying that economic policy such as the what? The monetary policy, okay, and the fiscal policy, they do not have effects, all right, on output. So they assume complete price flexibility. Sorry, that's an error. Flexibility. They assume completely price to be what? To be flexible. Meaning price will always adjust itself continuously. Prices will always adjust itself continuously. Okay? But economists came up to agree that this relation is okay, it's good, but that can only be applied in the what? In the long run. Okay? That can only be applied in the long run. So look at the Keynesian case. The Keynesian are saying no, in the short run, Keynes agrees that prices are fixed, are completely fixed, completely. So that makes them to have an horizontal aggregate supply curve. Okay? You can still see our normal demand curve, aggregate demand curve. But look at the aggregate supply curve. At first, it was horizontal. Subsequently, it was increasing. And then it became vertical. So for the Keynesian, between this horizontal axis is our short run. And then between this point at which it is increasing is our intermediate. All right? Intermediate, not the short run. We've moved from the short run. But in the long run, what happens? Aggregate supply becomes what? Vertical. So the Keynesian believe, all right, that the aggregate supply curve is horizontal. They believe aggregate supply curve is horizontal because prices are fixed in the short run. Prices do not change, all right? But they agree that when the economy reaches full employment, of course, you should know what full employment is. Full employment is that case where the number of vacancy is equal to the number of applicants. So in full employment does not mean there is no unemployment. Maybe when we get to the next topic, you understand that. But at full employment, we are saying there is vacancy, but it is the same thing with the number of those are applicants. So under full employment, when we have 1 million people that are unemployed, we must have 1 million jobs available, waiting for people to just apply and switch. Not the case whereby we have 1 million people that are jobless, that don't have job, and then we have 500 spots available. You remember the case of many of these programs, many of these ministries that are recruiting, they make an advert that they need 1,500 people and 10,000 people apply. That's not full employment. Under full employment, the number of vacancies must equal the number of what? Applicants. So you must notice that prices here are fixed, all right? But they can increase if we go beyond the full employment level of output. But note, prices cannot decrease below that P star. That means prices are sticky downwards. That's the meaning. Prices must be what? Sticky downwards. Okay? So Keynes also said that if you want to move towards the full employment, you can use the aggregate demand policies to achieve that. This is the short run. We are below full employment in the short run. This is the long run. We are in full employment. Keynes said for you to actually move to this point, you need to adjust this AD to be moving and increasing until it gets to the full employment. That's Keynes' assumption. Meaning fiscal and monetary policy or those demand side policies are effective in adjusting the economy. So the Keynesians are believing, one, prices are fixed, or it is at least sticky in the short run, fixed, it doesn't change. They also believe that output depends on aggregate demand in the short run. Output depends on aggregate demand. Remember, in the long, for classicalists, they said no, output is dependent on the supply side. Output is determined by the supply side. Note all of these statements, because when you hear in your exam question stories or cases, you should be able to understand the theory or context at which we are discussing this. You can't just say, oh, explain Keynesian perspective, explain classical. No. There will be cases that you will read. You should be able to decode that, oh, this is in relation to Keynes. This is in relation to the classical. So prices are fixed, or it is at least sticky in the short run. Again, output depends on aggregate demand, all right, in the short run. But it depends on supply side when we reach the full employment. What does that mean? It means for Keynes, they agree with the classicalist in the long run. Classicalist assumption will hold. However, in the short run, they do not agree that classicalist assumption holds. Rather, they said in the short run, prices are what? Are fixed. And so we can use economic policies, the monetary and fiscal policy, to adjust the economy in the short run. So short run policies are the monetary and the fiscal policy, because short-run policy of the monetary and fiscal policy is able to adjust the system, the market. Okay? All right. So that is a background to those two analyses. So for the aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve, prices are always sticky. This is the beginning of divergence of opinion between the classicalist and the Keynesian. Two extreme cases that gives us a two different ADAS model. Okay? And so they believe, or they brought up their argument, all right, between the short run and the long run. Long run, they don't have issues, but short run, they have issues. Classicalist, prices will always be flexible in the short run. But Keynesian said no, prices will always be fixed in the short run. So we are going to look at the cases of this, all right? So that means aggregate prices level can change in the short run, but it does not fully adjust after a change in the economy. So classicalist believes aggregate prices will change in the short run. But the Keynesian said no, aggregate prices level, okay, does not change at all, or even if it changes, it does not fully adjust itself after a change in the economy. And I put that question, why? For example, if you look at two firms don't always change their prices, all right, simultaneously. You must understand that. There will always be a leader and a follower. Remember the Stackerberg solution. We will always have a leadership and a followership relationship. So what does that mean? It means in an industry, for example, if you remember the telecommunication industry, there was a time MTN or Glo was changing the price, pulling the price downwards. MTN did not change their price. MTN was still a bit rigid in changing their price. What does that tell you? What that tells is that people do not respond simultaneously to changes in their price. So if you have two firms, all right, and there's a change in the economy, you will discover that people don't change their prices immediately. Some might be very quick to react to their price change, while others might not be quick to react to price change. So if two firms are producing at 30 naira and there are increases in cost of production, this will necessitate firm A maybe to increase its price from 10 naira to 20 naira. Firm B will not change its price immediately. There is a dynamic process. And that is why in your year 4, you should be dealing more on dynamic macroeconomics, dynamic model, to actually understand the process of time at which prices changes. That is the reason of you doing your differential equation and your difference equation in your mathematics year 3. Because differential equation and difference equation helps you to understudy the timeline, the time lag, the rate of change at which we have an initial steady state equilibrium and it begins to move, adjust itself to a new equilibrium. So for the fact that you draw your curve and you have demand, when price increases, bam, demand is now here. It does not happen immediately. It doesn't. Your year 1 and year 2, you are meant to understand that yes, once you increase government expenditure, once you increase this, demand was here, it moves to this same part and demand has increased. No, there is always a process of time that it takes for those adjustments to take place. So when firms adjust their price, not all of them will adjust their price. That makes price to be sticky. In fact, out of 100 firms, maybe only one will adjust. Others will just be adamant and say, we are not going to adjust our price. Take, for example, I remember when Ambode came to Unilab, when he was doing his photocopy, 5 naira. He was inside 2001 cafeteria, that building. He was in his photocopy there, 5 naira. Others were there. They refused to reduce their own photocopy price to 5 naira. So people don't adjust to their prices simultaneously. Others said, no, we are going to stick to our price. Price stickiness. Price is sticky. And in the process of time, later, he left that particular shop. He came down, went to be back. People, some still adjusted, but a bit. So firms do not always adjust their prices. Their reaction to price change is not simultaneous. There's a process of time. That's your dynamic macroeconomics. That's why you are doing your differential equation, your particular solution, and your intertemporal solution. So that means for the long run aggregate supply curve, they are consistent with classicalists. And so it is vertical, the natural level of output. However, in the short run, there is always a positive relationship between the aggregate price level and the level of output. 3 models will be used to explain this. 1, the sticky wages model. 2, the sticky prices model. And 3, the Lucas imperfect information model. Let's look at the first one, the sticky wages model. And I begin. Remember, what we are trying to analyze is that in the short run, aggregate supply curve is upward sloping, is following an upward trajectory. From your left to your right, slopes upward. That is our assumption. However, we want to explain why. 3 models can explain this: sticky wages model, sticky prices model, and the Lucas imperfect information model. Let's look at the sticky wages model. This model links the labor market and the aggregate supply. Remember when I drew that graph, I showed you MPL times P, wage is fixed. I want to explain that because I was thinking I could use that graph to explain and you understand, but obviously you needed better or clearer explanation. So the sticky wages model links the labor market and the aggregate supply. You will recall that your Y is a function of K and L, capital and labor. Capital is fixed. We assume capital does not change. But the level of employment, which is labor, varies. What does that mean? It means if labor should increase, your output will increase. The question now is, how can labor be determined? Because if you understand how labor is determined, then you can now link the increases in output due to labor. So our ultimate agenda is this. Our agenda is that output will always increase when prices increase. That is why the short-run aggregate supply curve is upward sloping. That's our assumption. Output will always increase when prices increase. How do we link this? The sticky wages model. For us to link the sticky wages model, we need to understand the relationship between labor market and aggregate supply. Recall from the aggregate supply, Y is a function of K and L. We assume capital to be fixed. Labor is variable. So if labor should increase, output will increase. What will make labor to increase is prices. So that is what I want to explain. That's what I want to explain. And that one that talks about that graph that you have before. So that means whatever that will make labor to increase is definitely prices. How can an increase in price instigate an increase in labor? Okay, that is the why. We begin from the labor supply side. Remember, we've done supply of labor and demand of labor. And I told you that that is needed in the real sector. It is needed in the aggregate supply. So we begin. If for a particular period, okay, we want to look at the supply of labor. Remember, labor is dependent on wage. However, there are 2 types of wage. 1, nominal wage, and 2, real wage. Nominal wage is your normal monthly salary, your wage. Your real wage is what can your wage buy, the amount of goods your wage can buy. What can your money buy? Remember, real income. That is coming from this analysis, real wage. So your real wage is what can your money buy? That is W over P, W over price. Okay? Now we ask ourselves question, how does firm and how does producers and laborers, how do they set the labor supply? How is wage set in that labor supply? You must note that the producer, that's the employer, and the employee, they are so much interested in the real wage and not the nominal wage. That is their point of interest. So they are interested in the real wage and not the nominal wage. So when we have the nominal wage, when we want to set our relationship, our effect, our decision, we don't set it based on our nominal wage. We make our decision based on our real wage. So if I'm an employee, for example, and Ore, for example, is an employer, so Ore has a company. For Ore to engage me, Ore will consider the real wage she wants to pay me, which is W over P. For me to accept that amount, I will consider the real wage I am being paid. So if real wage is W over P, that means nominal wage must be equal to real wage times price, because real wage is in quantities. If you remember, what can your money buy? Real income. You talk about how many watches, wristwatches, can I use my 100,000 to buy? That's real income. If I'm earning 100,000 naira per month as a salary, my real income is how many watches, how many of these watches can I buy? So if price of watches is 20,000 naira per one, that means my real income is 5 wristwatches. It's 5 wristwatches. But my nominal income is 100,000. That means my nominal income must always be equal to the price of the wristwatch times the number of wristwatches. That's where you have this that is highlighted in red. W equals to A times PE. This A can be your small W. I've forgotten what they call it. Is it inverted epsilon in Greek? That's this. So my nominal wage is 100,000, but my real wage is 5 wristwatches. That means the price of my wristwatch affects
power to the south. No matter how bad Tinubu is, I'm going to vote him because you are turning it to the traditional position already.
So, sorry for the other break in transmission. So my real income is 5 watches, and then the nominal income is 100,000 naira. The price level there is 20,000 naira. That same analysis can be likened to my real wage. I collect 100,000 naira as a wage. My real wage is 5 wristwatches. My nominal wage is 100,000 naira. The price level is 20,000 naira. So when we want to set our prices, when I want to, get a job under Ore company, I would ask for my wage based on my real wage. So I negotiate based on my real wage, the number of watches I can use my wage to buy. The same thing goes to the employer. When the employer wants to fix the wage, employer will also fix based on the real wage. So let's now assume that our nominal wage, of course, will be equal to that inverted epsilon times the price. Note, the price level here, the price you are deciding is expected price, expectation. Expectation must come in. Because when we are bargaining, I'm assuming that, so if I'm earning 100,000 naira, if I'm start earning 100,000 naira by the month of September, How many wristwatches can I buy by then? I can buy 5. Prices will be 20,000 by then now. That is an expectation. That's expected price. So that means my nominal wage was equal to my real wage, 5 watches times expected price. So if you have that, that means I can have W to be equals to the inverted epsilon times PE, expected price. Let me now divide W by P. Okay, I divide W by P and I divide the expected price by P. What does that imply? That tells me that my real wage that I'm going to set is equals to my wage that I'm choosing, all right, must be equals to the real wage times expected price over the actual price. So if there is no change in price, meaning the price of wristwatches now is 20,000 naira, and the price of wristwatches when I would start the job is also 20,000 naira. That means PE, expected price, is 20,000 naira. The actual price is 20,000 naira. That means it's 20,000 over 20,000. That means PE over P is equals to 1. Once PE over P is equals to 1, that means my real wage is actually this epsilon, which is real wage. Under that case, my labor demand will be equal to labor supply. In that case, I will agree on my wage. We will set the wage. Again, when we set the wage, because of contractual agreements, when we set the wage, that will be the wage, at least for the first 2 years, 3 years. Before you think of reversing your wage, for the first 2 or 3 years, we will set that real wage like that. That means once the employer and the employee decides on the wage or the going wage, once they are happy, expected price must be equal to the actual price. At that point, their real wage is set. That real wage is fixed. It does not change. So my real wage is fixed. That is my supply side. Under that supply analysis, the labor supply will become horizontal. Remember, in our former analysis, when we started the labor supply and labor demand, labor supply was vertical, upward sloping. But under here, labor supply becomes what? Horizontal. Let's now look at the labor demand. In the labor demand, remember, for us to demand for labor, if you studied your labor demand well, under micro, you demand for your labor when your marginal productivity of labor is equal to the wage. That is the point at which you demand your labor. Marginal productivity of labor, that is the additional output you will get when you increase one more labor. That marginal productivity of labor is synonymous with marginal revenue. Remember, in every employer setting, they make their decisions when their marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. The marginal revenue is your marginal productivity of labor. It comes from there because your additional output will be sold to get additional revenue. That means your marginal productivity of labor is synchronous to your marginal revenue. On the costing side, marginal cost, how much are you paying? You will pay labor. Remember, capital is fixed. Your wage becomes a marginal cost. So under the demand side, your marginal productivity of labor must be equal to your wage. But recall that employers are interested in the real wage. That means your marginal productivity of labor must be equal to W over P, which is your real wage. So demand for labor has been set. Supply for labor has been what? Set. At what point will a firm now decide to employ more labor? What will be the point? Remember that the relationship between real wage and labor demanded is inverse. Meaning, if real wage should fall, what will happen? Firms will employ more because real wage has fallen. They will want to employ more labor. the analysis is this now. What will make real wage to fall? W over P. That can only be when price increases. Remember, W over P, that is 100,000 naira I am collecting as a wage from Orange company over price of the wristwatch. 100,000 over 20,000, that is 5. So my real wage is what? 5. What will make real wage to fall? It can only be when prices increase. So when price increase from 20,000 naira to say 30,000 naira, what will happen to my real wage? My real wage will now become 100,000 divided by 30,000. My real wage is now 3.3. Meaning my real wage has fallen from 5 to 3. When my real wage falls from 5 to 3, that will instigate the employer to employ more labor. And when they now employ more labor, what happens? Output will increase. That explains the relationship between price level and output. Let me explain here so that we can have a clearer understanding. Okay, so I said in my labor setting relation, I will set my wage, I will demand for my labor when my wage is equals to my epsilon times expected price when I'm setting it. At that point I set it, I assume price to divide itself. Now I'm expecting my price to be 20,000 naira by July, August, September when I start work. What's the actual price now? 20,000 naira. In as much as the expected price is equal to the actual price, PE over P will be equals to 1. My real wage is this, is defined. That is the supply side. I will set my supply side relation to be this. My real wage does not change. W. This is my labor supply. Now I come to the demand side. In the demand side, for me to demand, I will consider the marginal productivity of labor. This is synchronous or synonymous to my marginal revenue. It must be equal to marginal cost. Me as an employer, my marginal cost is the wage I will pay, because that's a cost to me. Capital is fixed, it's not changing. So it is the cost for wage that changes. That will change. That is what I'll fix. Remember that me as an employer, I'm interested in real wage, not nominal wage. That is W over P. This nominal wage W is 100K. That's what I will earn. The real wage is 20,000. That means my demand for labor is equal to W over P. What causes me to demand for my labor? So 100,000 over 20,000, that's my real wage. That is what? 5. What will make real wage to fall? Whatever that will make real wage to fall, which is W over P, what will make it to fall? What will make W over P to fall must be that this price increases. So if price increases from 20,000 to 30,000, it becomes what? W over P becomes 100K over what? 20,000 over 30,000. And that gives me 3.3. What has happened? My real wage has declined from 5 to what? 3.3. And since my real wage has declined from 5 to 3.3, therefore, my real wage has fallen. What will happen to my demand for labor? It will increase because there is what? An inverse relationship between what? My demand for labor and my real wage. What instigated your real wage to fall? It is because of prices of goods that did what? Increased. And because wage is sticky, this nominal wage is sticky. We have agreed is 100,000. and it's 100,000 they will pay me for the first 1 year. Nobody will come and tell you, please increase my payment from 100,000 to 200,000 because prices has increased. Nobody will answer you. Example, Corona has come. Corona has gone. It's still there. Banks are still paying the normal salary. Economy is bad. Yes, they are still paying me my normal salary because we have a contractual agreement. We have an agreement. We have a contract. So this W over P, this W on top is sticky. It will not change. So when W is not changing, W over P will not change. So if W is not changing, once prices increases, W over P will drop. That means real wage will drop. And because there's an inverse relationship between real wage and demand for labor, when real wage falls, demand for labor will increase. When demand for labor increases, output will increase. And that is why aggregate supply is upward sloping. So that means that in our analysis, okay, prices increase. This will lead to W over P falling. Because W over P has fallen, the demand for labor will increase. When demand for labor increases, the supply of labor will increase. The supply of labor will increase. That leads to increase in employment. And when this happens, output what? Increases. What has happened? Price increased, output increased. That is the what? Relationship. Okay? That is the relationship. So, that means okay, so you have this. That explains that. Okay, so it definitely for the sticky wages, once expected price is equal to the actual price, output is at the natural level, no cause for alarm. But when expected price is greater than the actual price, that means our negotiated real wage will exceed its target, meaning price is falling. Meaning I expected my price when I resume by September, which is PE, to be 20,000 naira. But what becomes the price? The price is 10,000 naira. The expected price is greater than price. Price has fallen. That means the negotiated real wage has exceeded its target. Price has fallen. So price was 20,000 naira before, it's now 10,000 naira. Real wage is now 100,000 over 10,000. That is 10. It is no longer 5. Firms will now hire fewer workers and output falls below its natural rate. But when the expected price is less than the actual price, meaning price has increased, we expected price to be 20,000 naira by September when I start work. Prices has now increased. That will instigate firms to hire more. The relationship between output and prices can then be defined as Y equals to Y bar plus alpha P minus P expected price. Y is therefore, the Y bar is your natural level of output, and the adjustment will follow itself with that price level. Okay? So what does that mean? It means that, one, the Keynesian, the classical case assumes a vertical aggregate supply. Keynesian assumes a horizontal aggregate supply. When alpha is infinity, you follow that formula, okay? So with that, you can reverse that particular equation to have price is equals to PE plus beta Y minus Y bar, the inverse of it. Remember that your demand curve, in your demand, in your aggregate demand, Y is a function of price. In your aggregate supply, price must be a function of Y. When you reverse it, that is the Lucas aggregate what? Supply. That explains that. Okay. So the second one is the sticky price model. So I think someone hands is up. Okay, nobody's hands is up. Okay, so let me now explain the sticky price model. Sticky price model. Remember, there are two reasons why we have an upward sloping aggregate supply curve. One, sticky wage model. Two, sticky price model. Three, the Lucas imperfect information model. So what does the sticky prices model talk about? Of course, without what? Firms do not adjust their prices quickly. That's it. Okay? Some of them can, others will not. Some will set their prices in advance for a given period of time. So once they do that, you then have an assumption that firms do not adjust their prices simultaneously. Remember that firms are price setters. Okay? So for a particular market that is kind of monopolistic in nature, monopolistic competition, there is competition. However, people have their level of what? Monopoly based on their differentiated products. Under that analysis, prices will be sticky. Why? One, the long-term contrast between firms and customers. When you have monopolistic competition, some have entered into an agreement that, you are going to be supplying this detergent soap for me at the rate of 10,000 naira. You wouldn't change the price. This is our agreement. This is our agreement. Agreement is agreement. Nobody will change the price. Again, because of menu costs. Okay? Menu costs are those cost arrangement between the producer, firm, and its own supplier. You already have a list of items that you must buy, and all of those must form a cost menu. So in that case, you will always strive, because you're under monopolistic competition, to ensure that your menu cost is low in order for you to maintain that price. Because once you adjust your price, people will begin to change their orientation. Again, okay, when a price increases, firms are not omnipotent or omniscient. Just like one of you asked me, how do you always know what is in our group chat? But firms don't know everything. So a firm in firm A will not know if firm B is increasing price. So when firm A increases his own price, he does not know if this increase in price was attributed to himself by himself, because of himself, or because of his own volition, or the increase in price is attributed to the overall economy. So if firms do not know that, okay, what will happen? A firm can decide to increase its price. The other one will not even know that that firm has increased its price. Even if that one knows, because of menu cost, because of contrast between firms and customers, he will not want to increase his price simultaneously. All of this is explaining why prices do not adjust simultaneously. Okay? The second one, the level of aggregate output, why? Okay? When you have output that is high, aggregate output is high, is higher than the demand faced by a firm. What does that tell you? If the firm increases his own demand, he will like to set a price which his own customers will really want to buy. Because higher output and higher demand does not imply that your own demand will also increase. Remember, I'm a firm and I'm operating under my own analogy. So when I'm increasing my own price, I'll be careful, knowing that output is increasing. Even if there's higher demand, how will I be able to make my own market share. That is the sticky prices. Then the third one is the Lucas imperfect information model. All right. Under this idea, we assume first that there are many firms, and firms know their own price. They set the prices they produce, they set their own, but they don't know the price of others. That makes that price information asymmetry. That's imperfect information. So I don't know. This individual firm might be located somewhere, maybe in an island. The firm knows what perfectly happens to its own island, but it does not know what happens to the other firm's island. That means under this imperfect information model, somebody can be increasing his price while the other will not even increase. That explains the reason why continuous increase in prices does not imply that output will increase in prices will adjust itself. So the aggregate demand, aggregate supply we have explained so far is consisting of three elements: the aggregate demand curve that is downward sloping. We have a short-run aggregate supply curve that is upward sloping, and we have a long-run aggregate supply curve that is vertical at the natural level of output. That means our aggregate supply curve and aggregate demand curve, the relation is of this nature. Okay? Is of this what? Nature. What does that show you? Or what does that tell you? Okay? So you have it of this nature. We have the long-run aggregate supply curve, short-run aggregate supply curve, and then the aggregate demand. And we have what? Prices. The next thing you can see now is the relationship between expected price and the actual price. Remember, when prices increase more than the expected price, real wage will fall. When real wage falls, that instigates people to be, that instigates employers to employ more people, increasing the level of what? Employment. Example of this is this curve. All right. You see AD1 and short aggregate supply 1. This was the initial point. At this point, the expected price is equal to the actual price. Expected price is equal to the actual price. Let's now assume that prices, expected prices and prices increase from P1 to P2. When prices increase from P1 to P2, what will happen? The aggregate supply curve will shift outward because expected price P2 is greater than actual price P2 is greater than expected price PE1. And once this P2 is greater than PE1, real wages will fall, demand for labor will increase, employment increases, output increases, your short-term aggregate supply curve move to short-term aggregate supply curve 1. But remember that when prices increases, what will happen in the money market? In the money market, when prices increase, the real money demand balances will fall. And when real money demand balances fall, what has happened? The demand for money will do what? Decline. And when the demand for money declines, your aggregate demand curve shifts upward, moving from AD1, okay, to AD2. What I'm trying to bring out here is that in the short run, adjustment in prices leads to increase in short-run aggregate supply. But in the long run, it will return back to the initial solution. Okay? So that explains that this particular curve I was showing you, this is the supply of labor curve. This is the demand of labor. Meaning when prices increases, what happens? The labor demand will increase, because when prices increases, nominal wage, real wage will decline. And when real wage declines, firms can begin to employ more workers. Okay? Okay, so let me stop sharing. And okay, Abubakar, your hands are raised. What is your question?
Yeah, good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Based on your listing, you said that
Not based on
our
my
questions.
Sorry,
Sir.
it's specific.
Sorry, sir.
Don't say based on
Yes,
my.
sir. Based on your lecture,
All right, sir.
I mean, you said that our exams question will be based on real life situation, and now that you talked about the third aspect of price effect of price changes or price increase on the local's imperfect information model.
Yeah.
So I want to ask that, does this apply to real life situation? Because this in this world of technical advancements, no matter how much price changes in every industry, there is always there is always a way that all firms will be aware of it, and then other things happen like that. So that information asymmetry, does it affect in the world of now, like the reality in this present age?
Okay. Okay. Thank you. The only thing we have is that the level of information asymmetry has declined over time, meaning the rate at which firm A responds to changes in price by firm B is no longer prolonged, but it has declined. The reason is this. Yes, when we say information asymmetry, that does not mean they don't know at all that prices are increasing. It doesn't mean that way. It doesn't mean that way. So that does not mean, oh, because prices, MTN has increased their price today. MTN has increased their price today. Airtel or Glo, we know today. That is true. But when we are saying there's information asymmetry, is this: their process of time before you begin to adjust your price. Their process is fixed. Okay, so when you discover that MTN has increased their price, before Airtel will think of adjusting their price, they need to conduct a market analysis to understand the market, conduct a market analysis to understand what happens to other markets, to understand if we increase our price, what will be the implication on our output, on our sales. So within that period, they will use to do all of those calculations. MTN has already increased their price. There will always be information asymmetry. Because when MTN started planning to increase their price, they started this particular plan maybe 2 months ago or 1 month ago. They don't just wake up and say, you can't just wake up and say, please, operations manager, please increase the price tariff. No. They sit down and think about it. So they started their own process before. When they are doing that process, Airtel is not aware. They are not omniscient. No matter how technology is everywhere, within that period, Airtel is not aware. So the time lag between which they particularly increase their prices and the time at which other people will sit down and think about their price, there will always be information asymmetry. If there is no information asymmetry, as iPhone is developing the iPhone 12 Pro or 13, Samsung is also developing their own S21 or S22. But there will always be an information asymmetry. It is only when you have done yours, you can reveal, we know, oh, this is what you have done. Before I will start planning to do mine, it will take time. I hope that answers the question. Samit Abdurrahman.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon.
So my question is that when we first started the Keynesian short-run aggregate supply curve, that's because that in the short run the aggregate supply curve is horizontal, and that's
In the short run, the supply curve is what?
Horizontal because of sticky price.
Yes, it's horizontal in the short run.
So I was wondering how from that horizontal line, how it became upward sloping in the conclusion. I don't understand.
Okay, so what Keynes are saying that in the short run, prices is almost sticky, is fixed. That makes your aggregate supply curve horizontal. But in the medium run, output will respond to increases in price. And that is why it is somehow upward sloping. That's the medium run. Then in the long run, output or aggregate supply becomes vertical. So the other time I explained the sticky wage, the sticky price model, and the Lucas information asymmetry. Those three explanations were attributed, okay, to that upward sloping path. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, this is the short run aggregate supply. In the medium run, it will be upward sloping. In the long run, is like this. So this is aggregate supply curve. This is the short run point. Okay, this is the medium run. This is the long run. At this point, prices are not changing at all. Price is sticky, does not change. But at this point, output responds to increases in price. There are three positions. At this point, any changes will cause output to change. So this is the what? Short run aggregate supply curve, medium run, and long run. I hope that answers the question. Okay. Any other hands up? Oh no, no hands up. All right. So okay, yeah, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, your question.
Okay. Yeah, my question is
Elizabeth, you're not the one
okay.
talking.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, good afternoon.
Okay, I wanted to ask concerning the parts where you said when the actual price is higher than the expected price. You said the real wage will fall, causing the demand for labor to increase. Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you.
Okay. So I didn't understand that part. Then the second one, when the expected price is greater than the actual
Okay.
price, like I didn't understand the explanation well, sir.
Okay. So when expected price is less than the actual price, we are expecting prices by September to be 20,000 naira. But by September, prices was now 10,000 naira. That means my expected price, 20,000, is less than my actual price, 10,000. That tells you there is a decline in price. So once price falls, your real wage will increase, W over P, because P, the the denominator has fallen. W over P will increase, which is the real wage. The real wage will increase. And then when the real wage increases, what will happen? Firms will be reluctant to demand for more labor because there's an inverse relationship between demand for labor and real wage. So because real wage has increased, firm becomes related to demand for more labor, they demand less or lower number of workers. As they are demanding for less labor, what happens? Employment will fall. When employment falls, output will what? Will decline. In the reverse of it, when expected price is greater than, is less than actual price. So I'm expecting my price by September when I start work after bargaining for labor now to be 20,000. But it was less than the actual price. The actual price actually increased to 30,000. That means prices have increased by 10,000. And that means by September, price has increased by 10,000. Price of goods has increased. The real wage will fall because W over P, P has increased, the denominator increases, the ratio itself will fall. So when the real wage falls, what happens? The demand for labor will increase because as real wage has fallen, that is an incentive for the labor for the labor market, the employers of labor, to employ more. So when real wage falls, the demand for labor will increase. And when the demand for labor increases, employment will increase. When employment increases, output will increase from a y equals to a function of k, and L. So because output has increased, that tells you that prices and output will have a positive relationship. That is explained in that particular graph I drew. I hope this has been able to explain it better, Elizabeth.
Okay, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, Akinwale.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon.
You said 3 reasons why we have a slopy aggregate supply curve. You mentioned it, sir. You not mentioned.
I can't hear you, please. What did you say? I can't hear you. Can you come?
You said 3 reasons why we have a slopy aggregate supply curve.
Yeah.
And you not mentioned sticky wages, sticky
Model,
price,
sticky price,
and
model,
local
information,
okay,
market.
So, okay, sir. Thank you, sir. I want to
Confirm. All right, so we'll continue. So let's now look at so let's look at shocks in the let's look at shocks in the aggregates demand and supply model. Let's look at shocks. There are 2 types of shocks that we can have. One is the demand shock. 2 is the supply shocks. In the demand shock, these are shocks that will affect the aggregate demand, AD. Factors that will change the AD. Those shocks or those factors will affect the IS and LM, IS and or the LM. Since your aggregate demand is derived from the IS or LM model, under this shock, there are 2 of it. We have positive demand shock and we have negative demand shock. What are positive demand shocks? Positive demand shocks are shocks that will increase the aggregate demand. Examples of those shocks are if you have an unexpected tax cut, when you reduce tax. Remember from that our equation we did, y is a function of price. When we have y plus we did this blah 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 blah. When we did our aggregate demand curve, when tax reduces, what will happen to your aggregate demand? If tax reduces, you have more disposable income to spend. And when you have more disposable income to spend, your consumption will increase. And when consumption increases, you place more on aggregate demand. Aggregate demand will increase. That will cause your aggregate demand curve to shift outward. That is a positive demand shock. Again, another example are subsidies. When you bring out subsidies that are like palliatives to improve consumption, Those are transferred payments. That is an example of a positive demand shock. A sudden increase in money supply. CBN decides to increase money supply. That is a positive demand shock. Then the second one is a negative demand shock. This will also affect aggregate demand, and it will cause a decline in our aggregate demand, causing our aggregate demand curve to shift to the left. Example, a sudden increase, a sudden decline in house prices. Okay? Because houses are part of people's wealth. When the prices of houses decline, it will cause a decline in their value, and people's wealth will decline. And when people's wealth decline, consumption will decline. Because I believe you have been taught in your consumption hypothesis, under your relative income hypothesis and your permanent income hypothesis, that consumption is dependent on wealth. The real wealth effect, the ratchet effect, the displacement effect, you must have been taught in all of that. So I believe you've been taught. So when prices, house prices decline, your wealth declines, the value of your wealth declines, and that affects your what? Your consumption. That is a negative demand shock. Then we have supply shock. Supply shocks are shocks that will affect the aggregate supply. They will come from the supply side. We have the positive supply shock. We have the negative supply shock. When you have positive supply shock, that will cause your production to increase. And that will cause a decrease in your cost of production. And once your cost of production decreases, the prices you are charging your firms will also decrease. And so will aggregate price level decrease in the short run. A positive supply shock will cause your aggregate supply curve to shift to the right. Example of that supply shock is when you have new technology introduced, when you have policies that are geared towards enhancing the production sector. Very important. For negative supply shock, that will cause your short-run aggregate supply curve to decline. Examples are the oil shock in 1970, when the price of oil, crude oil price, just slumped. Bam. That was an example. There are so many examples. Okay? Let me give you another example. For example, we have the difference between shocks and policy is that in shock, the thing happened. You did not know. You didn't plan for that shocks. But in policy, you deliberately do that. So under policy, we have supply side policies. We have demand side policies. We have demand side policies that will cause an increase in aggregate demand. We have supply side policies that will cause an increase or a decline in aggregate supply. When it is policy, that is when it is a deliberate attempt. When it is shock, that's when you did not plan for it. So a sudden decline in price of crude oil is a shock, it's not a policy. Okay? But a deliberate increase in government expenditure through subsidy, that is a policy, that is not shock. You need to understand this. Let's now examine the past policies we have in Nigeria. We start with N power. And I ask, is N power a demand side policy or a supply side policy? I need an answer. Is N power a demand side policy or a supply side?
It's a supply side policy, supply side.
Okay. Who is saying is a supply side policy?
I sense, sir.
All right. Why is it a supply side policy? What is end power and what makes it a supply side policy?
Because at that point, I think the government is trying to increase the labor force and also productivity. So from that angle, that is where I'm looking at it.
What is end power? That's a very important question you must be able to understand or answer.
Power.
Okay. Any other person? This will go for 2 marks. Any other person?
Side.
All right, Akinwale.
Yes, sir. Supply side, because they are trying to increase the productivity through transfer payments to people. You asked the question. You said what is end power?
Okay.
It's kind of transfer payment, sir.
Okay. Supply side. Somebody else?
Hello, sir.
Okay. Udoka.
Okay, I think Empower is a policy by government to reduce the unemployment level.
So is it a supply side policy or a demand side policy?
It's more like a supply side policy, sir.
Okay, thank you. Adedayo Phillips.
Okay, good afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
So I believe the end power is a demand side policy.
Why?
Since it was created to reduce unemployment, and anything that reduces unemployment will reduce the income people earn. And when people earn more income, they can demand for more products and services, sir.
Okay. Olumide Omoni, you raise your hand.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, so
I think it's a supply side because this is actually a policy that is targeted towards alleviating poverty and actually giving youths the opportunity to acquire new skills. And in the course of acquiring skills, this will actually make them empowered, thereby adding to the labor force.
what types of Empower programs do we have? And what's the most common one?
I just have the general idea about it, like
okay. So let's answer this together. So what's Empower? The Empower program, for example, the teachers empowerment program and all of that. What does that particular program do? It lasts for 3 years, if I'm correct, 3 or 2 or 1 year, if I'm correct. You go to a secondary school. When you go to that secondary school, you are to assist a teacher in teaching. That secondary school did not expand numbers. 1, that secondary school did not admit more students. 2, the teachers in that particular school, all right, did not resign. So teachers are already there. You now come in to assist the teacher. That means at that point, either you will be the one teaching or the teacher will be the one teaching. Both of you cannot teach the students the class at the same time. And you are not admitting more students to create additional classroom for you as a newly employed teacher through the Empower scheme to be able to teach. At the end, the teacher and the Empower participants will have an agreement. Either I will come to some number of days, I won't come. Or would you be teaching while when I collect my Empower alawi, I will send half to you. Under that scenario, there is no increase in output. The number of students are not changing. That becomes a demand side policy because you are only giving them palliative. You are only increasing their consumption pattern You are only just giving them money, stipend. That comes as a form of transferred payment. That is the demand side policy. But if you look at the short P, subsidy reinvestment program, okay, that one was targeted to do what? Identify businesses, new and upcoming businesses, entrepreneurs, and then fund them. Give them money to set up their own businesses. At that point, you are doing that. That one is what? Supply side policy. So the supply side policy must be geared towards improving the productive capacity of the economy. That is the supply side policy. The supply side policy must be geared towards improving the productive capacity of the economy. That's the supply side. But in the demand side policy, you are just palliative. You are increasing people's ability to demand for money. Under that demand side policy, real output does not necessarily increase. So when you see government policies, you begin to ask yourself, which one is a supply side and which one is a demand side policy? Again, another example, the conditional cash transfer, okay, that came up during this lockdown, that they needed to give people certain amount of money. That is a demand side policy. It comes into the model through your consumption. You are only improving consumption. It's just a transfer payment. There is no improve or increase in output. All right. But look at some of these intervention programs by the CBN to empower traders. Trader money is a supply side policy, even if it is very small. Even if the money is very, very small, trader money is still a supply side policy. Okay? So when you look at the policy, first of all, what is that policy trying to do? For example, again, the other policy that empowers small and medium scale enterprises, MSMEs, those are also demand side policies. They are supply side policies. So please take note of these examples, all right? Take note. So note, policies are deliberate attempt. Shocks are unexpected. Yet, both of them will have the same impact. Note, take note. Policy is a deliberate attempt. Shock is unexpected. Both of them will have the same impact. So very briefly, I know it is already 4. So examples of those policies. Let's take example of expansionary monetary policy. Expansionary monetary policy. This is your IS. This is your LM. This was your initial interest rate output. Trace it down. This is your AD. This is your AS. Trace it. You have your initial output. You have your initial price. Then let's assume expansionary monetary policy. What happens? Your LM curve shifts outward. What are those expansionary monetary policy? A fall in interest rates or an increase in what? Money supply. When this happens, your aggregate demand curve will shift upward. To the right, you have AD1. While LM curve, you have LM1. This is the new equilibrium point. That will lead to what? Output increasing. And that will lead to what? Initial, new. Okay? That will lead to output increasing and prices what? increasing. If it is contractionary, the LM curve, all right, IS, LM, the initial point, you have this, AD, you have AS, okay? And then you have this. What happens when there's contractionary? Your LM curve shifts upward, all right? And then your aggregate demand curve also shifts what? Upward. You now have new, okay? What happens? Y has declined, and what? Price has what? Increased. So expansionary monetary policy, contractionary monetary policy, these are the effects. Positive demand shock. Positive demand shock from the money side. That is also this. Negative demand shock from the supply side. That is also the other one. Okay. Okay, so let me use, I've got a low battery in that. So I believe you can see my screen. All right, so let's now look at expansionary fiscal policy. All right, so you have your IS, you have your LM, all right, and then you have your aggregate demand, okay, and then you trace this down. This is your Y, you trace it down. This is also your initial Y. You trace this here. This is your R. Then you have your AS. Remember, this AS is your short run AS. And then you trace it. This is your P. All right. So when you have expansionary fiscal policy, what happens? Your IS curve shifts outward to IS what? 1. This increases, okay, causing your Y to what? To increase, causing your Y. Oh, sorry. So causing your Y to increase, okay? And then you have R increasing. Okay? That expansionary fiscal policy will cause your aggregate demand to shift outward. All right? And then you have this. What has happened? Your Y has increased. Okay? And then your price has also what? Increased. This expansionary fiscal policy is also the same thing as a positive demand shock. They have the same impact coming in from the fiscal side. Then you can also have the contractionary fiscal policy. All right. which is the what? A decline in your what? IS and LM. This is your LM. This is your IS. All right. This is your Y. Okay. And this is your initial R. This is your AD. AD. This is your what? This is your AS. Okay. Please, I believe you can see what I'm drawing. Can somebody just respond?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is your price. All right. Don't worry, I'll soon be done, please. I don't know if you have a class, but I'll soon be done, please. So that is that. So when there's contractionary fiscal policy, your IS curve shifts inward to IS1. Okay. And so when it shifts inward, you have this Y declines. You have Y1. Okay. Then interest rates will also decline. All right. That will cause your aggregate demand curve to shift upward. And this will also decline. And prices will also what? Increase. So you should know what happens to what whenever you have all of this. This is also a negative demand shock coming from the where? The fiscal side. For a positive supply shock, your aggregate supply will just increase. All right? Okay. So this ends this particular topic. Now, after this topic now, your topic, this is topic 7, if I'm correct. Your topic 9 talks about effectiveness of fiscal and monetary policy. So because I was hoping I will be able to conclude this lecture, this part today, and then teach the effectiveness of fiscal and monetary policy. 1 minute, please. All right. So I was thinking, okay, sorry, please.